Hi, welcome to lesson 3 in our adaptation project. Today's lesson is about adaptations that are designed to help an organism survive and how adaptations over time can actually cause natural selection and evolution to occur. So start with today's warm-up, which is on the lesson plan pictured here. It's also in the slideshow and it's also on the ECHO agenda. This is a good review from our predator-prey symbiosis lesson yesterday. Think about what might happen to a prey organism if it was unable to adapt over time. And second question, on the flip side, what would happen to predators if prey became very well adapted? Pause the video to do the warm-up. And today we are collecting the worksheet from lesson 2, which is the predator-prey worksheet and the symbiosis on the other side. So today's lesson actually takes 2 days. Today's the lesson warm-up, video, and discussion. And then we'll talk a little bit about the bird beak lab directions. And then tomorrow in the next class period, you'll get a chance to do the bird beak lab and go to an adaptation interactive. Those things are all going to be linked right here in the lesson plan. So I'm going to be using these slides today during the workshop. I'll show you some quick directions on the bird beak lab and how to do the interactive at PBS. So let's start with the slides. All right. So today is November 5th, and this is the warm-up we just read. Let's talk about today's learning targets, which also apply to tomorrow's lesson. We are hopefully on our way to explaining how adaptations help an organism to survive. And we want to be able to take an adaptation maybe that you heard about yesterday or today and apply it to that human survival product for the end of the project. You should be able to give a lot of examples of adaptations by now and explain how they specifically can help the organism survive. Also part of the driving question. So this was an interesting story about Charles Darwin's studies with some organisms on the Galapagos Islands. So I'm going to be on this slide for a little bit talking. The video linked in today's lesson also talks about the finches in the Galapagos. So if you're familiar with island ecosystems, they're usually quite isolated. Not a lot of different organisms are coming and going from islands, especially those like the Galapagos that are way out into the ocean. A lot of really cool ecosystems. Australia itself is an island and has unique creatures that aren't found anywhere else in the world. Madagascar has a lot of really cool organisms. So Charles Darwin, who is considered the father of evolution, wrote textbooks on evolution, went to the Galapagos Island to study a lot of organisms there. And one of the organisms that he spent a lot of time studying was the finch population. So if you're familiar with finches, they're a type of bird. We have finches around here. And he noticed that all of the finches on the Galapagos Islands, and there were quite a few species, I think like around 10, seemed to have very specific adaptations that were fitted to their environment. And he theorized that a long time ago, a population of finches had to populate the island. And as competition increased, the finches adapted to very specific and unique food sources so that they could survive. And he studied the finches and he noticed that they all had very different bird beak shapes, different food sources, and lived in different areas. So if we look at this picture, these are all the different finches that live on the Galapagos Islands. And if you look carefully at them, you can see that they kind of have slightly different beak shapes. And we can see that there are four species of finches that reside in the trees. Okay, so these are all unique enough that they're their own species, which means that they no longer can interbreed with one another. They're their own unique species, but they have characteristics that make them related in some way, over millions of years. Only one has a parrot-like bill, and only one finch in the Galapagos eats fruit. There are a couple that have similar beaks for grasping insects, But then notice the woodpecker finch has a much different shaped bill. It eats insects, but what do woodpeckers do? They tend to try to reach into tiny little holes and crevices in the trees. So it has a probing bill and it eats insects. All right, the warbler finch also has a probing bill that eats insects, but wow, these two look quite a bit different. Then there are 5 species of finches that are all very dark in color, and they look very, very similar as if they have a common ancestor. And they all live on the ground, but they eat slightly different things. So, all different kinds of seeds. One is very, very specifically adapted to eating cactus. All right, and it probably has to have this longer bill so that it doesn't get poked by the cactus needles. These 4 have crushing bills to eat seeds, but they're all different sizes. And again, they're different species, so they don't interbreed with one another. So Charles Darwin was actually one of the first scientists to notice that organisms seem to be related in some ways, but had different features. In fact, these birds all developed a different kind of bill. So the food drove the adaptation. Okay, if you get more food, you survive longer, and then you reproduce and pass those traits along. We are going to try and mimic bird beak adaptations in a really fun lab today. At this part of the lesson, you need to pause and go back to the lesson plan and watch the 12-minute video on natural selection and adaptations. It's right here. You'll hear a little bit more about Darwin's finches. You'll hear a little bit about the peppered moth. It does get a little bit more complex than what we need for middle school, but it talks about those things and I want you to hear about it. So go ahead and pause the video, watch the natural selection video, and come back for some instructions on the bird beak lab. All right, so we are planning on doing the bird beak lab in class tomorrow. We're going to start today by talking about the lab instructions, the roles, and the rules. So what we're going to do is simulate how different birds eat by using different tools to pick up pieces of unpopped popcorn. All right, and we're going to get the popcorn, which represents the food source, from a variety of different containers. Then we're going to analyze the data and see that certain beaks, and I put beaks in quotation marks because the beaks are the different tools that are adapted for certain food sources. And these are going to be our 3 different containers. We will put you in groups that fits our classroom needs best, whether that be 2 people, 3 people, or 4. Some people might need to assume 2 or more roles, but we're going to decide that today. If you're doing this at home, it helps to have someone assist you in this because it is very difficult to do this just by yourself. So one person will be the bird, and they are the only person that attempts to feed with the specific beak type. So they are the only people that are allowed to pick the corn, and they can only take 1 piece of corn at a time. Okay, the counter is the person who will hold on to any food that the bird captures. Now, sometimes we don't have enough people. The bird can just drop the food someplace that makes it easy to count and is separate from the original food pile. Now, this is a really important job. Job number 3 is the timekeeper. And the timekeeper must monitor the time and calls when time is up. So you're only allowed 15 seconds in each trial run to get food from the container. That's not very much time. So the timekeeper is going to say, on your mark, get set, go. And when 15 seconds is up, the bird needs to immediately stop feeding off of the corn. The recorder is another job that someone could double up on. It's just the person who does the counting. They will count how many food pieces were collected in that 15-second trial, and they will document the data in the chart below. So the teacher, if you're in class, will help with putting the food in the container. It really doesn't matter how much food starts out in each container, but the rule is that the birds can only take 1 piece of food out at a time, and they must place it in either the counter's hands or in a separate area that make it easy to count. If you drop it on the floor or drop it while you're trying to transfer it, that piece doesn't count 15 seconds from each container, and the timekeeper will decide if the last piece counts or not. So what I suggest is getting one food source container at a time and using all 3 beak types. So we'll use a beaker or a bowl for food source number 1. The bird will attempt to get pieces of corn out with tweezers, a spoon, and fingers, just your regular fingers. And you'll record how many pieces you could gather. So it's looking at which beak type is best adapted for this type of food. You're going to need to take the beaker back up to the front of the room or switch out for a test tube. Okay. Sometimes it helps if someone holds the test tube. The bird person can hold the test tube, but we don't want the test tube to fall over. But you are allowed to tip the test tube to the side. You're just not allowed to dump the test tube out. The bird beak actually has to get the food out with the beak. So we have tweezers, spoon, and fingers for the test tube. And finally, the food source will just be laying out on a flat tabletop. So using this data, which doesn't take too terribly long to collect, you're going to answer the questions, and a lot of these are multiple choice, about which bird beak was best adapted for each container. Okay, then you're going to hypothesize what would happen to each bird type if the food source was only available in one type of container, and then the best bird beak overall for all containers. And this is going to be an on-paper assignment for those in class. If you are doing this at home, you can document your answers in a separate Google Doc because this one's not easy to type in, or print it out at home and do that at home. If you don't have corn at home, you can use something else. Like rice. I can always send materials home if you don't have tweezers, but we're definitely okay with changing and adapting to the scenario. So this is our bird beak lab. We'll hopefully finish it up on Friday. So back to the lesson. The last thing to do is actually a group activity as well, but you can certainly do it by yourself at home. There's a really fun website that helps us understand how natural selection occurs. And if you get like a situation like me where your flash player is blocked, you need to allow that. So I guess we're doing it right now. All right, so this has volume. It's really annoying. You might want to turn it off. You have a companion worksheet that goes with this simulator. You can click on how to play, you can learn more, but basically what's happening is you are able to change the environment. So in this case, this is the healthy green environment, and as you slide it more towards the pollution, you can see the environment changes. Now, all you have to do is sit and watch for a while and notice what color bugs get eaten by the birds. So you really have to watch this for a little bit. And you can experiment with all sorts of different environments, like what would happen if it was in the middle, in between, and you can see which bugs are blending in. There's a worksheet with some questions that for the kids in class will be right on the back of the bird beak lab. This one looks like this. And again, it's not one that's super easy to type into, but you can turn this in online if you need to. And it's just asking you about what you saw while you played the interactive Nowhere to Hide. And I thought it was PBS, but it looks like it's ScienceNet links. All right, all of these links and documents and everything will all be linked for you in this lesson plan. I just need to add a few more links. I will post this video to my YouTube channel, and there will not be another video lesson until we start lesson 4 next week on Monday. So again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email your teacher, and hopefully you have lots of fun doing the bird beak lab and playing the Nowhere to Hide interactive.